Dear viewers and listeners of Khabar Hub and Radio Candid, welcome to the very special interview with Major General Ashok Kumar Mehta. Major General Ashok Kumar Mehta is a retired Major General of the Indian Army. He writes extensively on defense matters and previously anchored Defense Watch on Doordarshan, the national television of India. General Ashok Kumar Mehta is an expert on Nepal-India relations and is also a member of India-Nepal Track 2 Dialogue. He is a military commentator and has spoken and published his work across different platforms. Today, we'll be discussing various aspects of Nepal-India relations with our expert, Major General Mehta. General Mehta, welcome to Khabar Hub. Let me say the first question of today. How does the new Nepali Congress government, led by Sher Bahadur Deuba, mean for India? How does India plan to engage with the new government?
First of all, Pramod ji, thank you very much for inviting me on your program. Also, it's good to see you again. It's good to be able to talk to you and to our audience in Nepal through your medium. And I'm most grateful and thank you in the end for your most generous remarks about my abilities. Yes, the answer to the question on Sher Bahadur Deuba's government, I think any government will deal with its counterpart in another country. So India will deal with an elected government. India has had excellent relations with Nepal. Nepal is the most important country as far as India is concerned in the subcontinent. India has no favorites. India has only its national interest like Nepal does. So India works to its national interest and in consonance with certain values, democratic values, values of freedom, liberal democracy. And therefore, the change of government after a long period of instability in Nepal was welcome in India, and Prime Minister Modi had called Sher Bahadur Deuba ji on his election as the Prime Minister for the fourth time, fourth or fifth time. So that's the answer to your question.
So let me move to the next question. Other than limiting China's influence in Nepal at the moment, what may be India's priorities in Nepal?
Well, India's priorities, obviously, at this time of the COVID pandemic, the number one priority is to ensure that Nepal is free as much as possible under the present conditions of the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you recall, Prime Minister Modi had held his first conference in 2020 after of the SAARC countries on COVID-19. India has tried to help Nepal in terms of equipment, both at government to government level, and there is a separate channel of government to the Nepal Army. As you know, Indian Army and Nepal Army have some very unique and special relations. So there is a channel that deals with this, but overall, it is to assist Nepal in combating its COVID epidemic. Unfortunately, in the last 6 or 8 months, India has not been able to help with vaccines because of shortages in India itself, and India has been unable to keep its promises to other countries because it was swarmed by a deadly second wave which is just about now receding. So, contrary to its intentions and desires, it was unable to meet its commitments on providing vaccines to Nepal. But as soon as the situation improves, that deficiency will be made good. The other priority, of course, is economic development. Economic development for Nepal, and economic development obviously flows from political stability. Uh, we hope now that the internal, the past struggle has come to an end. There will be political stability in Nepal. It will lead to prosperity and economic development, and India will fast track its development projects. So the number two priority for India is to help Nepal boost its economy by helping it through these aid and economic assistance projects, which were not moving as fast as was necessary.
So there is a perception in Nepal that towards the end of his tenure, Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli had taken India into confidence to sustain in power. Question is, had Oli resolved his differences after the high-level visits from India to Kathmandu in 2020?
Well, I think it's the other way around. It's India that took the initiative. If you recall, India sent its raw chief, followed by the army chief, followed by meetings between ambassadors, following conversations between Mr. Oli and Prime Minister. So the initiative was largely taken by India to improve relations between Prime Minister Oli, and Prime Minister Oli does not have a very favorable track record in the Indian book, copybook, because of the Kala Pani issue, and before that, his resorting to ultra nationalism on the basis of the constitutional issues and the economic blockade. And so the Kala Pani issue came up, and there were a number of other anti-India issues about what India was doing. And finally, Oliji got this constitutional amendment on the map, the new map of Nepal. But overall, the relations, the matters have not been resolved. The Kalapani issue has not been resolved. There's been no foreign secretary level dialogue, which should have taken place, and other smaller issues, smaller in relation to the border issue, should have been resolved. But due to the COVID pandemic, none of that has happened. Also due to the political instability in Nepal. And I do believe that now that the situation is different and there is considerable political stability, some of these issues may begin to be discussed at various levels, G to G.
Thank you, sir. It has been more than 3 years since eminent person group finalized a joint report with recommendations aimed at redefining the Nepal-India bilateral ties. However, the group hasn't been able to present its report to the Prime Minister of both the countries, which has created lots of noise in Kathmandu. Where does the contention lie?
Well, I think the EPG issue is the most tricky issue between India and Nepal. It was when the EPG, I think it was 2011 or 12, when Baburamji Bhattarai was the Prime Minister. The idea of an EPG was mooted then, but it was formed much later, I think in 2015-16, with a 2 to 3 year mandate, and they had, I think, some $300,000, and they had 9.5 meetings, and they were able to resolve the issue. In fact, they had produced a joint report, uh, which, according to one or two signatories who I have met both on the Nepali side as well as on the Indian side, there was consensus, at least on the surface, there was consensus on the report. But if you scratch the surface, there were differences. And I think the main difference was in the 1950 treaty. There were certain issues or clauses of that treaty, articles of that treaty, that Nepal wanted changed. And Nepal wanted the 1950 treaty to be more contemporary. It was some 1950 and 2021. So we are talking of almost 60 years, 65 years. So it needed to be changed. But as I mentioned in the beginning, it is a very sensitive issue. For India, anything to do with Bhutan, Nepal, and at one time Sikkim, these were three border states that were crucial in India's security considerations. And I do know that the 1950 treaty is one of those issues uh, that has come up from time to time. And Chakra Bastola was the foreign minister. They had set up a joint working group on it with foreign secretaries of two sides. Salman Haidar was the foreign secretary from India. And finally, Mr. Bastola, late Mr. Chakra Bastola, told me that the government of Nepal was not too keen to make these alterations to the treaty. And as the Pashupati Shamsher Jang Bahadur Rana, during of the Panchayat regime, once told me when I interviewed him in the 90s on the 1950 treaty, he told me, 1950 treaty, General, as far as 1950 treaty is concerned, let sleeping dogs lie. That's how he ended it. But my own view is that the EPG report must be addressed. And again, it is for political reasons that the government of India has not dealt with it. One of the EPG leader from the Indian side is a governor in Bombay in 2018. They've tried, but for political reasons, I know this for certain, that the issue is not, we already have a lot of problems between India and Nepal. And if you bring up the EPG at that time, it will raise a hornet's nest. But that doesn't mean that the issue or the EPG report will be suppressed. It will come into discussion, and I believe that either next year or definitely next year, we will hear about the EPG report with political stability restored in Nepal. I have had meetings with Beg Bahadur Thapaji, who was the leader of the Nepali side on the EPG. In fact, I met many members, and I have no doubt that both sides want the various issues that have been raised by the EPG, in the main, the 1950 treaty, to be resolved, and I'm sure it will be.
There was not a single visit by Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh during his decade-long tenure, while Prime Minister Modi has made 4 official visits to Nepal in 4 years. Has India prioritized Nepal in recent times?
Yeah, but I don't think you should judge the importance of relations between two countries only and alone by the number of visits the Prime Minister has made. Some years ago, I had written specifically on this issue that there was no visit from the Indian side for 16 years. But I had pointed out then, and I will point out again, as I pointed out in the beginning of this program, that for India, Nepal is the most important country. If you recall, when Prime Minister Modi became when Modi became the Prime Minister, one of the first countries he visited was Nepal. And as you say, Nepal has been visited 4 times by Mr. Modi. So that indicates how important Nepal is. After all, Nepal is like the Tauco of the Indian subcontinent. To Mathi Tauco Macha, uh, right at the head is Nepal. The body of the subcontinent is the rest of India. So that is very important. And I would also say that there is no question of prioritizing. India, for India, Nepal is number one, will remain number one always, and we should not judge the importance that India assigns to it merely by how many visits the Prime Minister has made.
How do you look at the recent visit of BJP Foreign Department Chief Dr. Vijay Chauthai's visit to Kathmandu?
Well, I think it's Mr. Chathaiwala in India is, in my view, although his official title is Foreign Policy Cell leader in charge of BJP, but his main task is he is the he is the PR manager also of Prime Minister Modi. So all Prime Minister Modi's visits abroad for NRIs, whether it was Silicon Valley or it was London or Toronto, Mr. Chathaiwala spent all his energies organizing the NRIs uh, for these meetings. But having said that, Mr. Chathaiwala is a professional, and together with the Ram Madhav, they are coordinators. He's from the Rashtra's RSS, Mr. Chathaiwala. He operates below the radar, but I see from the Nepali media that his visit was recognized as a very important event. And so it's good that at the present moment, while no physical visits have taken place during the pandemic, I think except the army chief and the raw chief, this is the first political visit, but it's taken place not from government, but from the party. It's a visit from the party. It's an important event, and we should recognize it as that.
Why is India always caught into controversy while signing any agreement with Nepal?
Well, that's not true. It's not true. We have signed many agreements that have fructified. In fact, the oil pipeline, the integrated checkposts, lot of yes. What you are referring to is in the past. As you gentlemen and ladies in Nepal say, yo wile ko kura ho, ye old issue ho. But the attitude and the approach has changed. If you see in the last 3 or 4 years, there is a sea change in the manner of addressing the new agreements and projects. In the past, the main hiccup was on the hydroelectric projects. And most complaints about projects not starting, projects going beyond the timeline, the time and cost, because the hydro issue, and I know this because I've done some study on this, it involves a lot of kickbacks. And it is held very close to the party or the government in power. And especially when the 10-year insurgency was on in Nepal, many of the projects, hydro projects that India wanted to complete or start were interrupted by the Maoists themselves. They would come and occupy the sites, prevent workers from reaching there. So there were interruptions. But you would have noticed that in the recent past, there is a change because India realizes that it is not the only player in Nepal. India is competing with other players, and both in terms of quality, in terms of delivery, and in terms of time and cost lines, India has to perform better. And we can see those results as I have enumerated to you, that we've made a lot of improvement in the delivery of many of the agreements that have been signed and that will be signed in the future.
General Mehta, like in September 2019, a 69-kilometer cross-border pipeline between Nepal and India was inaugurated. It was completed 15 months ahead of schedule, and it is the first of this kind in South Asia. What went wrong on previous Indian development projects in Nepal? Why have many Indian development projects long delayed in Nepal?
Well, Pramod, we've really addressed this question in the last one. And so the oil pipeline, cross-border pipeline, the 69-kilometer pipeline, which resulted in the cost of fuel that was delivered to Kathmandu reduced by 2 rupees or a substantial amount, was due to the nature of the project, the forward thinking in the project, and the fast delivery. And it's for the reason that I just mentioned, that India is now competing not just with other players, but the Nepalese expect India to provide quality goods, quality service, on time, and in good order. And I think that is the change of attitude. You can see this uh, from the way the government to government relations have changed in the last 3 or 4 years. We are no longer, India is no longer micromanaging things as was the complaint. India is no longer dealing only at the bureaucratic level. There is political engagement between the two countries. And without political direction and without political engagement, obviously delivery cannot be as efficient and as effective as if you left it only to bureaucracy, which was the case in the past. So things have changed for the better.
Thank you, sir. At the time when India and Nepal are struggling with COVID-19, how can India help Nepal in vaccinating the Nepali people through India's neighborhood first policy and vaccine diplomacy?
Well, as I said earlier, that for the most important issue for India and Nepal. See, India and Nepal have this unique open border. Nowhere else in the world, not even Canada and the United States, do you have an open, unregulated, virtually unregulated border. Nepalese and Indians move freely, goods move freely, people move freely. And so this is one of the greatest virtues of the 1950 treaty. This people of Nepalese domicile are able to access India in jobs, in buying land, in employment, joining the army. So, I mean, this is unique. Nowhere else in the world do you have this example of cross-border movements. And so, therefore, this COVID pandemic, if there is a rise in India, that rise obviously travels to Nepal and vice versa, but more in the from India to Nepal, because India is large population. And when the Nepalese return home for festivals or whatever, uh, the COVID travels with that. So this has to, in fact, for India and Nepal and for the rest of SAARC, this has to be an integrated vaccine diplomacy. And India has to go all out to help Nepal uh, to address this problem of COVID-19. And the India is now seeing the declining phase of that deadly second phase of COVID-19. There are some reports of a third phase, but keep your fingers crossed, because in Nepal now is festival time. Dasai, Tihar, and all these festivals are around the corner. And so let's pray to Lord Pashupati Ji Nath that this COVID stays at a low level, and eventually both that India can help Nepal to combat this menace for good. But that may take some time.
Um, General Mehta, before wrapping up, let me raise the last question. What are Indian concerns in Nepal in relation to China?
Well, you know, China at one stage used to openly tell Nepal that you go along with India, because we are talking about during the period of monarchy. And till 2006, as you know, the Chinese were helping the King Gyanendra to fight the Maoists. And they had used many unfavorable slogans against the Maoists as hijackers of the Maoists, anti-state insurgents, um, and generally criticizing uh, the uh, the Maoists. And then there was this change once there was the Maoists came into power. Then there was this great transformation, a dual transformation amongst the Chinese. One, they used to say that they will not interfere in the internal affairs of Nepal. And number two, that um, that they would, in fact, their assistance programs increased dramatically after the left alliance government came into power. So the Chinese position has changed considerably, and they were the ones who were able to bring this left alliance into a reality And for the first time in history, in Nepal's history, democratic history, enable nearly two-third majority of some 173 seats of the Nepal Communist Party. That was all with the good offices of the Chinese. And unfortunately, all that has has disintegrated for the time being, because in politics anything can happen. So as far as India is concerned, India does not want Chinese to play a role that would cross India's red lines, and India's red lines are the Indian Army, because if the Chinese, as they used to us, are not now, when the NCP was in Nepal Communist Party was in power, they were asking for recruitment of Gurkhas into the Chinese army, and so that's one red line as far as India is concerned. Otherwise, the Chinese should assist Nepal in its development. After all, Nepal is a bridge between China and India. Unfortunately, the relations between China and India are at their worst ever, and therefore what Nepal wanted to do was to bridge the gap and improve relations between China and India, as well as take advantage of two of the fastest growing economies, China and India. But unfortunately, that has not come about and is unlikely to come about. But nevertheless, Chinese are free to come into to do what they are doing in India. Has no fiat to embargo Chinese activity. It's up to the government of Nepal to be sensitive to India's security concerns and other red lines. Otherwise, I don't think the government of India has any problem with the Chinese legitimate activities inside Nepal.
Thank you, sir. General Mehta, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and wish you good luck.